The Locker Room, with all the sports news you need, live.
Good afternoon and welcome to the first Sunday Locker Room show of the new season. Can't wait to get stuck into the games yesterday, even though they were pretty lacking goals. But delighted to be here as always. I am Graham Duthie. Delighted this afternoon to be joined by Alistair Blair. Alistair, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Graham. Unlike you, I've not actually seen my team in competitive action yet, so I've got that to look forward to. On the downside, though, when I was on Friday, that meant you asked me about it, so I'm going to talk about it again today. So
exactly, can't get away with that. But we will obviously talk about the games yesterday. We are keeping an eye at the moment on the Dundee derby. 70 minutes gone, Dundee United 2, Dundee 1. We'll get stuck into that as well. We'll also keep an eye on the games this afternoon. St Mirren against Hibs, which has just kicked off, and we'll have about half an hour. Celtic against Kilmarnock. That starts at 4:30. But I'll give the results from yesterday, just in case you've not seen them. In the Premier League, it was Hearts 0, Rangers 0, and Motherwell 0, Ross County 0. In the Championship, Airdrie 1, Wraith 0, Hamilton 0, Ayr 2, Livingston 2, Dunfermline 0, and Partick 0, Morton 0. In League One, it was Alloa 0, Queen of the South 0, Cove Rangers 1, Annan 3, Inverness 1, Dumbarton 1, Montrose 1, Kelty Hearts 1, and Stennismuir 2, Arbroath 1. And in League 2, it was Bonnyrigg Rose 0, Peterhead 1, Edinburgh City 1, Stirling Albion 2, Elgin City 4, East Fife 2, Forfar 0, Clyde 0, and Stranraer 2, Spartans 2. Now, before we look at the games that happened yesterday and the Dundee derby, we'll start with the breaking news that came out this afternoon. Wraith Rovers put on their website this afternoon that they have parted company with Ian Murray after one league game in charge. They did say that they hadn't obviously started the year that well, but last season they were very good. They were in the playoff. They were beaten in the playoff final by Ross County, although I thought the first game they played well, but the second leg against Ross County, they just kind of fell a bit short. But Alistair, for me, it's still a very, very harsh decision, I think, to sack Ian Murray this early in the season.
I am flabbergasted, whatever that means. It's the first weekend of the season, you know. I don't know if this is a record. I suspect possibly not. It'd be a bit like, I think it was Neil Cooper who got sent off for Aberdeen against Celtic or Rangers after about 6 seconds. It's that kind of thing, you know. And as you've just said, he had a really good season last year. I'm reasonably well informed that he might have been looked at seriously by St Johnstone when they were looking for a manager before Craig Levein came in. He was one of the ones they were looking at. And Wraith Rovers, I mean, I watched some of the games on the Friday night at the BBC. There was a game against Thistle, I remember in particular. Plays really good football. Really good to watch, getting decent numbers in. And it's a bit like, I don't know what they were expecting. If he's a bad manager, they would know by now. Clearly he's not, because he's managed to get them into a position by which they're in the playoff and they get through the final of the playoff. And okay, they lose to Ross County, which tends to happen. The statistics favour the Premier team. But it's incomprehensible unless there is something else which we're not aware of, which occasionally we know can be the case. You know, managers can leave for circumstances which are not made public. I'm not suggesting for a second that is the case, but as I said, I'm flabbergasted. First, I actually texted a friend of mine because I'd told him I thought Craig Levein would be the first manager to get sacked. Other people, I think, on the Friday show said Jim Goodwin. Well, looking at the Dundee derby today, that's not going to happen. Certainly not this weekend. Staggered.
Good afternoon, Kieran. You've also said my prediction: St Mirren 2, Hibs 0, Kilmarnock 1-3, 3-1 Celtic, St Johnstone 1-1. Yeah, I just find it really strange, and I kind of said the same thing. It feels like there might be something else behind the scenes that we don't know about. Now, I know that they've talked about results, performances not been great since turn of the year, but I just think it's very, very harsh. I mean, I don't think anybody saw this coming. It just feels a very strange decision. You know, one league game in, I don't think they were that bad in the Premier Sports Cup. I know they didn't get through, but it just feels a very, very rash decision, and it just does make me wonder, is there something else behind the scenes that we don't know about?
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of? I've got a friend who's a Charlton fan, and you're probably too young to remember this, Graham, but when Ian Cumbersley was the manager at Charlton, and they were in the Premier in England, and they had a lot of really good players, Scott Parker, people like that. They were a great team, and they fired him when they were doing really well. And talking to my mate Barry, who's a real Londoner, a Charlton fan, as I said, and he came up with the classic, "Oh, he's taken us as far as he can." Well, see where Charlton are now. I mean, now I don't know what's going to happen to Raith Rovers. A very good friend of mine is a Raith Rovers diehard. He's been a director. He's the club historian. He's Raith Rovers through and through. And I haven't spoke to him, but I'll be interested to see what impact it has. And it's maybe a sort of salutary lesson for other clubs who want to move their managers on, because just now it's almost fashionable is the wrong word, but there is no tolerance whatsoever. Back in the day, which I know makes you sound like a boring old you-know-what, managers were given plenty of time to develop. And the vast majority of them never actually do that well. I mean, just watching the Dundee derby, they were talking about Dundee back in the 60s when they were great under Bob Shankly's brother. And then United, I think people forget United were a nothing team, really. Maybe until Jerry Kerr came along in the 60s and they had all the Scandinavian imports. And then, of course, they had Jim McLean, transformed them, great manager, and they became a big team, which previously they certainly weren't. Now, I don't think Raith have ever really been in that league, but I think it's be careful what you wish for, And incidentally, by the way, I do like Caden because he predicted that we're going to draw with Aberdeen, which is probably better than my predictions.
I think in the Dundee derby, they're looking at potential penalty here on a challenge on Simon Murray. Now, I think they're checking for offside first. I think he might be in line, but there is a late challenge here. And if that isn't offside, that's a definite penalty.
Ooh.
Graham goes in very, very harsh. If he's not offside, that has to be a penalty. Because he takes Simon Murray clean out.
This is the first big VAR decision of the season.
Well, there was one at Tynecastle yesterday, which we'll get to.
Right.
But I think they're checking for offside first, because if he's not offside, then that's a definite penalty. But we'll keep an eye on that. But Big Pickstony says Ian Murray should never have been sacked as a Raith fan. I agree with that. I think as well, he was allowed to bring in experienced guys like Paul Hanlon, Lewis Stevenson. He's been allowed to sign players. Yeah. Now, who takes over? I kind of said this earlier on as well. I do wonder if they might now go for the man that he got beat by yesterday, Rhys McCabe, because I think Rhys McCabe is an excellent young manager. We played Airdrie last season in the Cup, and I love the football he plays. He's a really good manager. This is going to be a penalty. The referee is going over at the monitor. We know what that usually means. It's a definite penalty, I think, for Dundee. So he must be onside.
Yeah.
I'll be surprised if this isn't given.
Thanks for reminding me about Airdrie in the Cup last year, Graham. That was kind of you. And you're absolutely right. I would have said that if you took a straw poll amongst Saints fans before we appointed our current manager, they'd have had McCabe like a shot. They absolutely outplayed us. Mind you, we played rubbish, but and they're a good team. They're a good team. So will they have enough money? I don't know at that that level how much money there is. The respective budgets of each club. Airdrie slightly on the up. Raith, who knows? Your guess is as good as mine, but they're going to have to pay off Murray. They then have to find some money, presumably, to buy out whoever it is. So all around, this is going to cost them money. I'm keeping in mind because it's getting moderately exciting, as you say. We all know what's coming now. Although maybe under Willie Collum, maybe it's going to change. Maybe it's going to be... no, that's actually not. If it's not offside, it's a stonewall penalty.
Yeah, I think he's given it. It's a penalty. It had to be because it's a late challenge. It had to be. It's a yellow card as well, so it's a penalty for Dundee. It was very, very borderline that it was offside, but I think he probably washed his on, so it's a penalty for Dundee. If it was something to do in the background, why let Murray make signings unless they would have fell out after the Airdrie game and had enough? Especially when I don't think we'll get anyone better. I mean, again, it will come out eventually what's happened. I just think it's very harsh because I think it's done a fantastic job. I think it's very, very harsh. First big VR decision of the 2024-25 season. It's a definite penalty. There's no debate. There's no debate. It's a definite penalty.
Yeah. So, I don't know you may be behind me in terms of this, but he's just given it now on my iPad. So you'll probably know if you scored or not before I do.
It's Luke McKeown that's going to take it. I mean, it's been a very, very good game. I've got to be honest, it's been a very entertaining game. Luke McKeown is going to step up to take the penalty for Dundee. We'll just stick with this and see what happens.
Graham's just been
Luke
booked from us.
So up steps McKeown to try and make it 2-2 from the penalty spot for Dundee. Steps up, scores 2-2. So Big Pat Stoney says, very good Dundee derby, and we'll get onto that just now because it is Dundee United 2, Dundee 2. This was billed as obviously a massive, massive game. First game of the season for both teams. And I've got to be honest, Alistair, it's been a cracking advert for Scottish football.
It has. I'll be honest, he still hasn't taken the penalty on my iPad. It obviously takes a lot longer for the signal to get here. So, he's just walking back just now. No, it's been a brilliant game. Small confession, we had a slight problem with one of the tyres on my wife's car. So I came in, put it on the iPad, went back out, saw the car, came back in, it was 2-1. So I actually missed the first 3 goals. And he just scored now, man. But yeah, listening to it at half time, we can maybe come on to that later on. It's interesting that they're actually, strangely, the Sky are not at Dens for some reason. I'm not quite sure why that should be. But I thought Dundee would win this. They might still, mind you. But on the basis of what I've seen up till now, United probably did deserve to be in front. It's been watching the goals back, brilliant goals, really incisive football. Second one, he took out the entire defence with the pass across the 6-yard line. It was a brilliant, brilliant bit of football. Whereas the Dundee one was a bit more of the sort of conventional sort of errors all round, etc. And I'll be intrigued to see how this goes because we were winning against Dundee last season at Dens and they beat us in the last 10 minutes with some weird refereeing decisions, it must be said. But this one is actually fair enough, is spot on.
Yeah, Big Pat Stoney says, as a Wraith fan that loves the Fife derby feed on Fairland, I have missed the Dundee derby. Always entertaining to watch. In my opinion, the more derbies, the better. It's a good advert for Scotland. I agree with that, and it kind of, I hate saying this, but it kind of puts Edinburgh Derby to shame because I've seen numerous Edinburgh Derbies that have finished 0-0 and been pretty terrible. But this has been a very, very open game. I think both teams have come out of this looking very, very good. As a header just over the bar there for Dundee. United took the lead on 13 minutes through Tapanowski, one of the new signings. Seb Palmer-Holden equalised on 18 minutes, but young Miller-Thompson put United back in front after 22 minutes, and I think he's been excellent. But genuinely, I've really enjoyed this game. It's been very open. Normally, first game of the season, you think it'll be kind of scrappy, but it's been very, very open. Both teams have really gone for it. Yeah,
and it's kind of what you want to see. I mean, I don't know what you think, but over the summer, there's been a few people have said, including me, it must be said in a blog about this, but also the Wolves manager and a number of other people going, look, football is actually turgid. The Euros there was a handful of good games. The rest of it, as a friend of mine said, you could, go out, make a cup of tea, take the dog for a walk, come back, and they'd still be passing the ball around the 6-yard box. Incidentally, that header's just gone over the bar now. So I think I'm in a different time zone here. But you're right. And the point about Big Pat Stoney about the Dunfermline derby, you'll be looking forward to that this year because Dunfermline appear to be minced so far. There's a manager who will be under pressure. Now, if he'd gone in the next couple of weeks, I wouldn't have been surprised. But going back to Ian Murray, I was surprised. Yeah, it's strange because for us, our derby is Dundee more than United. And that's his thought is a lot of people think it's the early 60s game when we got relegated and Dundee won the league. I have seen articles in the press suggesting that was fixed. It was supposed to be fixed so that both sides would draw because that would mean that Saints stayed up and Dundee would still win. Whether that's the case or not, I don't know. But it does do something different to you on the day of the game. You go there and you're more fired up. Now, for you as a Hearts fan, Graham, going to see Hearts against Hibs, it's then quite tedious if you're watching a 0-0 draw. If it's really, I can think of one or two very, very exciting ones. Probably, just watching, you've probably seen this already, but there's a really nasty kick by Murray in the delicate regions of the United goalkeeper. Sorry, I digress. Derbies, yeah. We're a bit stuck because nobody apart from Saints actually thinks that Dundee is a derby. The Dundee fans don't particularly. It's, as far as they're concerned, it's United. And it must be strange because, I'm trying to think who else there is. I mean, Aberdeen don't have a derby unless you call Rangers a derby because they hate Rangers.
Well, it used to be that Aberdeen Dundee United was called the New Firm Derby.
Yeah, and I remember going to watch a game when they were at their peak at a New Year game. When Gough and Miller and people, and they were fabulous teams. It was a brilliant game of football. But obviously, as far as United are concerned, it's not really New Firm derby in the sense it was the New Firm. But there's an interesting question. I mean, how many clubs have actually not got somebody who is their sworn enemy, their natural derby team? Not sure.
That's very true. Lyle Cameron and Luke McKibben are far too good for Dundee and Silla. Yeah, I actually thought they would have gone this summer, both of them. I think they're very, very good players. We actually play Dundee next week. 5:30 kickoff in Premier Sports. I'm looking forward to that game. It should be a decent game. Good afternoon, Ross. Hope you're doing well, mate. All good here. Alistair is a St Johnstone fan, so he's buzzing for tomorrow. He can't wait for Aberdeen tomorrow.
This is a new novel definition of the word buzzing.
I mean, the derbies, obviously I'm 45, I'll be 46 this year. I've seen a lot of them with the derbies. And I don't get the same excitement for it anymore because they kind of are quite dull. I'm very lucky in the fact that when I was brought up, we had a run of 22 games in a row unbeaten. It was just every week we'd either beat Hibs or get a draw. And I remember John Cahoon, one of my favourite players growing up, who said that he did a thing years and years ago where he used to say that going into derby games, Hearts used to go into games against Hibs, no, we couldn't get beat, and Hibs used to go, no, they couldn't win. That's obviously changed now because either team can win a derby, but they're very different games. They are. Fans get buzzing for them, fans get excited for them, fans get nervous. I only get nervous really for the cup games because getting knocked out by Hibs in a cup game is gutting. League games are slightly different, but derby games are they're a completely different atmosphere. There's a different feel about them. And this one here, for example, this Dundee derby has been absolutely fantastic. I really have thoroughly enjoyed this game. There's about 5 minutes to go, but it's been end to end, some cracking football played. They're just different games.
Yeah, I think here's an interesting thought for you, right? This game actually, from what I gather, I said I missed the first part of it, but while I was attending to the tyres in my wife's car, I had the radio on, and I got the impression there was one or two meaty challenges. And now it's so hard because basically the referees clamp down on all that kind of stuff, and you can't tackle and all that kind of thing. Whereas in the past, you could guarantee a derby. The first thing that would happen was somebody would put the winger 10 feet in the air or in the stand or something. The crowd were instantly on it. And again, it made the game different. And that comes back to my previous comments about the way the game's played. This game has been end to end. And I think, again, just listening to some of the people talking about this on the radio over the last couple of weeks, football goes through cycles, and we're currently in a cycle which is almost been determined by Barcelona and Pep and the way they actually play. And then, of course, there's the stupid changes in the laws so that you can't clear you don't have to clear the ball out of the penalty box. So we all try and play tippy-tappy football around the box. 99 times out of 100, the teams aren't good enough and just gets lumped up the park anyway. So the game is boring. This is great because people are actually trying to attack. I would love to see a change in football thinking so that wingers actually take on their full backs. And you've seen it in this game. You see it in every game. The wide player gets the ball, he plays it back, they play it back inside. They basically shuffle the ball around. There's not the courage, because managers won't do it, to say, you're a winger, you're a better player than him. I've maybe said this to you before. You had Kenny Aird played for Hearts, maybe a bit before your time, Graham, but
before my time.
one of Saints' greatest wingers, the sort of poor man's Jimmy Johnson. And he said to me, he was told by Willie Ormond, who wasn't a bad winger in his day, as one of Hibs' famous five, always take on the full back because you'll beat him probably about 3 or 4 times in the game. You're a better player than him. That's why he's a fullback. That's why you're a winger. When you beat him, the game changes and we'll score a goal. And you just don't get that nowadays. So I think I'm just watching a fairly meaty challenge again there. It just makes it a much more enjoyable game for fans.
It's funny because obviously St Mirren and Hibs are playing just now. We've got Celtic to come later. But if this game stays the way it is, that's 3 draws in the opening weekend of the season. If this stays the same.
Yeah, which my gut feel is that it probably will. Because I think, do you not think most teams will be thinking, right, actually, we don't want to lose it now? Going back to
yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not the courage to actually go, look, we're going to go for it. If it was a cup game, going back to your point, they would be absolutely going for it. And again, that's, as a fan, that's what you want to see. That said, I can entirely understand why, you would play safe and take the point. First game of the season, manager doesn't want to get sacked. And that's probably, if we're drawn 1-1 with Aberdeen with 5 minutes to go, I'll be absolutely ecstatic and I'll be shouting for them to get the ball out the park and all that kind of stuff. But I'm conscious. I've got out of the side corner of my eye. I'm watching this game, but if there's anything exciting happening, you'd have told me 5 minutes ago. So,
hey, listen, if every game ends up a draw before tomorrow and you win, you could end up top of the league after one game.
Well, a friend of mine who's a gunner who lives down in Devon, he was a big gambler, and I sent him because he often asks me, what do I think? Because he goes to Scottish football because he thinks he'll get decent results and they're fairly predictable. I said I thought Hearts would beat Rangers, and I said I thought Dundee would beat Dundee United. I also said I thought Saints would beat Aberdeen. So based on that, we'll get talked 4-0. So.
Well, still about a minute. There's a minute of normal time to go. They've not put up the board for stoppage time yet, but that'll just be coming. Big Pickstony says, I've went to a lot of Wraith Rovers v Dunfermline games and I've never been disappointed. There's always goals and excitement, but I do believe the derbies are better in the Championship because no VAR, which is probably a fairly good point because you're not then waiting after a goal scored to think, well, that might not get given. That's probably a fair point, which is why I like the Championship because there is no VAR in it.
Well, the Scottish Football Supporters Association did a survey of first division, lower division fans at the end of last season, and I'd have to go and look it up. But unsurprisingly, one of the questions we asked was, do you prefer watching football, outside the Premiership because of no VAR? And the vast majority of fans said, yes, we do. We'd much rather watch the Championship. And Willie Collum coming in will be interesting. Obviously, the Euros, VAR worked better in the sense that it was a lot quicker, but the issues were still there. We saw some horrendously, in my view, really stupid decisions. And it comes back to who's this game for? Well, it's for the fans. We're the people. It's often cited that Scotland has the highest per capita, fan base, as it were, in Europe, and about 50% of the income comes from the crowds. Well, it's probably a lot more than that, because if you look at the television pictures from Tannadice, you look at the advertising hoardings there, most of them are actually small local companies. In between all the adverts, obviously, for the gambling companies from China. But the rest of them are all small companies. So they're all punting this money in. And we're the people who do not get listened to. I don't know what people watching this think. I don't know what you think, Graham, but if we actually had a proper, honest to God's, open and fairly vigilated, not Venezuela style poll among Scottish fans, would you rather keep VAR or get rid of it? I think the majority would get rid of it.
I know we obviously did the programme with the guys from the Behind the Whistles podcast, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and we did speak about Willie Collum and stuff, but I've kind of always said the thing for me is a lack of consistency. Now, we will touch on the Hearts game later, but if we look, for example, at the handball that wasn't given yesterday from Connor Barron, last season that's given. And I said yesterday I thought it was a penalty. Stephen Naismith said it wasn't, which is fine. But if you're going to be consistent and you're not going to give that every week, then that's fine. But my issue is that wasn't given yesterday. But if the same incident then happens next week, you're going to have the case of why wasn't it given yesterday? It's the consistency. And I said that when we did the podcast with the guys as well, that I generally don't think VAR's the issue. It's always been the referees at the problem. Now, I hope that changes this season. I don't know what Willie Collum's going to do. I know the guy said on the podcast that he'll do what he's told. But I have my doubts that Willie Collum's the right man for this. I'd like to see them go a bit more left field and give it to somebody else. But it does seem for me, and this is something that's been mentioned before, it does seem like jaws for the boys. And that's the issue a lot of folk have got with that.
Sorry, I've just been distracted by something you probably saw 10 minutes ago when Dundee should have scored.
And they should have just scored again as well.
Have they? All right, okay. I mean, I'm currently at 92 minutes, so you're probably about 94 minutes, are you?
93.
All right, okay. That was a great save. I apologise. I see Big Paxton says how Simon Murray missed. They should be winning. Yeah. I believe the guys from behind the whistles actually went and looked at that decision in the Hearts game and said they thought it should technically have been a penalty, which means it should have been a penalty according to the laws.
Yeah.
And you're right, the consistency is there. I mean, my beef is as well known as the whole concept of VAR. If you can make it instant, or as near as damn it instant, the same way that the ball crossing the line is if we had the technology, which we can't afford. Oh gosh, how did he miss that? This is a great game. I'm sorry. Don't listen to us. Go and watch the last couple of minutes of this and then come back and watch us. No, don't do that. Don't do that. I'm starting to sound like Michael now, aren't I?
Oh, did I do that? I didn't want to do that.
But it sucks the joy out of the game. You get to your feet. You've paid your, 30 quid for us to go and watch Kilmarnock this Sunday. I don't know what Hearts were charging or getting charged, charging Rangers fans yesterday, but it's getting expensive. Mm-hmm. And you get out of your seat having spent your 30, whatever it is, quid, and then you sit down again because you have absolutely no idea whether it's going to be given or not. And that I actually thought
I know there was a lot of really poor games at the Euros. I thought the group stage was all right, but I actually thought VAR worked quite well at the Euros. It was only when the English referees did it mucked up. But I genuinely thought overall the standard of officials, it was far quicker. Everything was done far quicker. And then you look at Scotland and think that would never happen here.
No, you're right. And maybe, dare I say, there were no Scottish officials there. Maybe there was a correlation. You know, the semi-automated offside makes a big difference. Well, get that sorted so it's fully automated, and all of a sudden that just removes that from the game. In an ideal world, you've got not just goal line technology, but you've got technology with Hawkeye all the way around the pitch so that there's no doubt as whether the ball's over the line. If you remember the World Cup, there was one where there was this huge debate as to whether the ball was over the line, and it was like a veneer of the plastic around the leather. It was nonsense. Sort that, and I've got no problem with it because it doesn't suck the joy from the game. It's hang on a second, we're going to go back and look at this. And as every referee I've spoken to has said, it'll not stop where it is because you'll get, sure as fate, one of the big clubs, not necessarily in Scotland, but in European competition, will lose out, and it'll be because something was in the face before the goal was scored. And they'll be like, hang on a second, that's completely wrong. I always cite the Roy Aitken throw-in for the Old Firm final. That wouldn't count. But it changed.
What a chance for United to win it. They're a great cross into the box. The guy's got acres of space and he's put it well over. And the game has finished at Tannadice. It's another draw this weekend. Dundee United 2, Dundee 2. But I have to say, a fantastic game of football. I mean, a lot of folk, even United fans, were not convinced by Jim Goodwin. I know it's only one game into the season. It's a Dundee derby. But I genuinely thought United played some good stuff there. They looked really quick up front. I like the signing of Trapanovsky. Like I said, the guy that scored the second goal, young Lewis Miller-Thompson, thought looked very good. But generally, I think both teams can look at that and think either team could have won that. It was just end-to-end stuff. Cracking advert for Scottish football. And that's what we want to see.
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, actually, Dundee United could still win it because they're still playing. But no, you're right. And it would be interesting now actually to go and compare that to the game you watched yesterday. Because I thought that wasn't a bad game as well, sitting there with no dog in the fight. And we've got a new owner who has had a session with the fans on Friday, which I wasn't actually, I don't live in Perth. But people have reported back to me, he said again that he wants to put 1,000 more bums on seats at McDermott. Well, he might get it from Dundee, by the way, looking at the way these two teams are playing, but he obviously wants home fans doing that. And this kind of football will help. It'll help if we win a few games as well, mind you. But actually trying to attack and trying to score goals and trying to score more goals than the opposition. I apologise if I've told you this story before, and I know that I sound like I'm, basically go back to the Ark, but we played LASK, the Austrian team in Europe, a few years ago when we were last in Europe, and had Gordon Whitelaw with us. And Gordon Whitelaw was one of the guys who played in Ormond's team, scored against SV Hamburg. Great player, scored 70 goals for Saints. Very nice elderly man now. And we watched the game and we got beat. And I said, your team would have beaten them, wouldn't they, Gordon? He went, he said, I'm not sure. He said, they're a good team. But he said, you know what, we'd have gone about it a different way. And what he meant was that they would have actually attacked. That was the way football was played. And that's what gets people going. That, plus I'm going to bring up something else here, which will be interesting. We've got Championship fans watching us. There is no doubt that most Scottish fans would like a bigger league. That would, to my mind, take away a lot of the fear. You could bring through young players. There would, you look at Falkirk. There's a big, in Scottish terms, team on the way up. They're going to probably challenge this year in the Championship. They may fall short, but they're a team that should, based on their fan base, etc., 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 be in the top flight. And then you can start. I mean, United have got a lot of youngsters. Dundee United have got a lot of youngsters, and again, it's great to see them being played. Once you get into the depths of the season, and then the managers start getting worried about their jobs, are they going to get a game? But wouldn't it be great if they could?
I have always maintained, and I'll say this again, I really wanted an 18-team league. And we had the chance to do that when Hearts got relegated, Partick Thistle obviously as well, in 2020 when COVID hit. That was the time to do it. But unfortunately, Neil Doncaster decided, I know what I'll do, I'll let every team vote. And every team then voted for their own
interest,
which I knew was going to happen anyway. But that was time to do it. So if we'd have done that, 18-team league, if I'm Neil Doncaster, I'm saying, look, this is completely new. We've never had this before. It's a COVID season. What we're going to do is we're going to extend the league, make it 18-team leagues. And I don't think many teams would have complained because it would have made it far, far better. I think playing the same teams potentially 4 times a season, even more if you're in cup football, it does get boring. It does get stale. I think an 18-team league is the way to go. And I've always said that. But they blew the chance to do it back when COVID hit. And it won't happen now.
Yeah, sadly, I think you're right. I mean, the chance of it happening now, it is self-interest, and it's the people who run the clubs, who are on the committees, who go, well, actually, you know what? We don't want to give up our 2 games against Celtic and Rangers, or our big derby games, or whatever else. Now, the derby games you would still get. I don't know what it's like yesterday. What it was like yesterday, from watching the telly, I don't think it was every seat was sold. Maybe I'm wrong.
We had, I think it was just over 18,000, I think was the attendance, but I don't think every seat was sold, no.
Yeah. We certainly don't sell all the seats for the Old Firm. Again, I think I may mention this on the show on Friday. It's well known that a lot of clubs, the season ticket holders, will not go to the Old Firm games for reasons which you don't have to be genius to guess. So that in itself has a knock-on effect. The other thing I would say is this: if you're playing, doesn't matter whether it's Celtic or Rangers, but we'll stick with them because they're the big teams in Scotland. They're the teams, if you beat them, even if you're a Hearts, never mind if you're a St Johnstone or a Motherwell, it's a great day. If you're only playing them at home once, you're going to be so up for it. It's your one chance of the season in front of your own fans. If you play them 4 times, you're almost resigned to knowing you're going to get beat. And that, I think, is detrimental. And I come back to the other thing is this: it's bringing the youngsters through. Okay, we got to the Euros as the international side, but it's not great. We're not seeing, in my view, people coming through. The friend I was talking about, who's the Raith Rovers fan, who is the foremost Scottish football historian on the planet, he has a database of everybody who's played in Scotland ever, right? And he comes up at the end of the season, goes to the museum and looks up the data. And what he tells me is that all the clubs in Scotland, there are far fewer young Scots coming through. They're trawling through the lower reaches of English football, bringing up players who are not Scottish, they're on loan. And all that, of course, is actually just sucking out the talent or the potential talent or the opportunities for the talent from the national side.
Caden asked, what is the Hibs score? It's still currently 0-0 after about 32 minutes. So another 0-0 draw to start the league season. But just back on the Dundee derby, I mean, I suppose a point apiece first game of the season is not a bad result for the other team. And I think if you're Dundee United, watching that, I thought they played some really good stuff. And again, I've seen a lot of folks say that Jim Goodwin's not a great manager. After what happened to Aberdeen, losing to Darvel, they had a horrendous week losing to Darvel, Hearts and Hibs. but I think he has signed quite well. And I've said already, I think I said on Friday, I think United will surprise a few people. I don't think they'll get relegated. I don't think there's any chance of that. I think they'll do all right. I think they might be finished about 7th. I think they could have a decent season.
Sadly, I think you're right. I mean, I was kind of hoping they might be one of the teams who might keep us up, but based on what I've seen today, and okay, 1-4 doesn't make a summer, but based on what I've seen today, they are a good football team who actually play attractive football, and they'll get the fans watching them. But they've scored. I'm just watching their second goal. It's a brilliant goal, and
yeah,
it's significant that a lot of the guys last season, who were sort of stick-ons in the Championship, they're obviously not there now because you say he's brought in new players. And that, to my mind, is the mark of a good manager. It's being able to spot a player, particularly now when, as I've just said, we're trawling I don't wish to be detrimental, but the lower reaches of the English game, if that. And as a result, the quality in Scotland, you maybe remember Stuart Cosgrove had a rant last season on Off the Ball about how rubbish Scottish football was. And while there'll be die-hard people who go, no, you're running down the country, etc., most fans I know would agree with them. It's not what it was. Now that's not me being reactionary and old. If you go back and look at Celtic with Larsson and Moravcik and all these kind of players, they're a league above where Celtic are now. Same with Rangers with Gascoigne and the England captain, the boy Woods in goal. I mean, those were fabulous players. We're nowhere near that level now. And the interesting thing was, other Scottish teams could compete with them, so the overall standard was better.
Rangers probably for me had one of the best players I've seen at Ibrox for a long time. I'm not a Rangers fan, but watching him, Brian Laudrup was a sensational footballer. We played Rangers in the Scottish Cup final 95-96. Gordon Durie got a hat-trick that day. We got beat 5-1, but Laudrup was the star of the show. He was just a sensational football.
Yeah, I mean, around about that time, I was doing the St Johnstone programme, and part of that was you had just shows you how times have changed. I mean, you were given, not only were we given the list of all the players' numbers to phone up, we also, prior to the game, we used to get the referee's number. So we actually interviewed a lot of referees. You can't imagine that nowadays. But you'd phone up the players and you'd have a chat. And one of the questions you'd always ask, the usual programme interview stuff, it's, what do you like, pre-match meal, all this kind of stuff. Nothing controversial. Not why did you miss that sitter last week, which is what the fans really wanted to know. So one of the standard questions was, who's the best player you play against? And at that time, there was a lot of people to choose from, and it was Larsson, it was Laudrup, it was Gascoigne. And they would say, I remember Nick Dazovic, who's one of Saints' greatest players, most capped international player for St Johnstone, a very, very good midfielder. He said, you've no idea how good Gascoigne is until you play against them. And the defenders would say the same about Larsson and Laudrup. Just brilliant players. And there's nobody like that now, I'm afraid.
No, absolutely not. I mean, just in terms of Dundee, obviously a really good season last season. Again, I kind of said on Friday's show that second season's always the hardest when you come up. Do you still think Dundee can have another really good season? And more importantly, can they keep hold of the guys like Luke McCowan and Lyle Cameron?
Well, the answer to the second question is I'll be surprised if they can, because they're very good players, and good players are in short supply. Therefore, people will go and look for them. Also depends who their agents are. Are their agents looking to make some money out of them? Because I'm not suggesting that there's agents are in anything other than the money. You're right. The second season is much, much harder. And I think you can see that not just in Scotland, you see it in every league. You see it in the Premier in England, where, every season, the three clubs that come up are the ones who are expected to go down. In Scotland, maybe slightly less so, but if you actually can stay up, then the second season, it's really tough. I think Dundee will be fine. I think Dundee, if any Saints fans are watching this, they'll probably be throwing things at the screen, but Dundee actually play good football. They do all the right things right. Will they be in the top six? It depends on other clubs. It depends on Hibs and Aberdeen. I think St Mirren are going to carry on being good this season. But Hibs, well, we'll wait and see how they get on today. I take it it's still 0, is it?
Still 0-0, yeah.
Yeah. There's obviously issues there. I think it's as much as what your opposition's going to do, which will determine where you end up. there's not much to choose from, I don't think, in the bottom 6 or so. I don't think anybody's going to be isolated. I hope not, because that just ruins the season. I think you'll find there's probably a bit like last season. Somebody might be an obvious stick on, and might well be us. But I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be much tighter. Let's put it like that. Yeah.
See, as well, just going back to something about referees, because this just popped into my head just now. I should have mentioned this on Friday because I completely forgot about it. But Willie Collum had actually said that we were going to trial referees getting mic'd up. Now, again, this is something I've said should have happened a long time ago. It works in rugby. Now, I know that rugby and football are completely different, but I think if you mic refs up, it gives you that bit of transparency. Now, you might not agree with some of the decisions, but at least if you can hear what's getting said, I think then at least it gives fans a chance to say, right, okay, I now understand why he's given that. I might not agree with it, but I understand it. So is that going to be a good thing if that comes into Scottish football? Because I think it can't be any worse than what it is just now.
No, that's true. Is it going to be a good thing? It is the case a long time ago, before you were born, that referees were allowed to tell the press what they thought after games. And then it was kind of frowned on, and it was stopped. And yes, it's not like rugby. I mean, rugby referee, it's a totally different way of refereeing. They're actually controlling the game because it's such a violent game and there's so many things happening. They're actually telling the players almost what to do at times. You're offside, all that kind of stuff. You can't imagine well, maybe some fans can imagine Willie Collum saying you're offside, get back. But the single biggest problem with it is the obvious one, which is I don't think there's a bleep machine that exists that would actually his batteries would wear out after about 5 minutes. And that is a problem, because the broadcasters are not going to want to broadcast football, because let's be honest, footballers, the reason they all sound so thick when they're being interviewed is because they can't swear, because that's their normal speech. That plus some of them are thick, but it's true that they've got to think really hard. They've had their media training, don't swear. So they're concentrating like mad and not swearing, and then they trot out all the cliches like, you're playing Dundee next week, what's that going to be like? Oh, it's going to be a tough game. Nobody ever says, you know what, they're pants, we're going to beat them 3-0. And I'll tell you a wee story here if I can, and I won't take the sweary words out, but Scott Brown, the well-known Ayr United manager, this is a Willie Collum story. Available in the book, by the way, about referees, if anyone wants to look it up on Amazon. Willie Collum was talking to Scott Brown as a Celtic captain, and I think it might have been Aberdeen. They were playing in a cup final or something. And he was basically telling him, look, you've got to respect the referee, all this kind of stuff. And Scott Brown said, what's the effect of, he sort of stomped off, and Collum said, come back here, you're disrespecting me. But no, you're disrespecting me. We're going to pump them. so I don't need any of the kind of stuff you're giving me. And to be fair, Celtic did go and pump them. I think it was Aberdeen. I apologise if it was somebody else. But nobody's going to say that. Nobody's going to go, you know what, we had Livingston, we knew we were going to win. Because that's not the way it works. And that's, going back to the thing about referees, here's a couple of other things. Here's a rugby thing which we should introduce in football. In rugby, nobody, players, club officials is allowed to speak to the referee for 15 minutes after the game. Just not allowed. Now, they would say, oh, you can't, how could you do that? Motions are high. Well, you know what? You could do it, because all of a sudden you start getting booked and you're up the stand and you don't see it, and all of a sudden they'd stop doing it. That takes away all the post-match heat. And I've spoken in all my dealings with St Johnstone managers who've been in the referee's dressing room after games shouting and swearing, So that, to my mind, would be a really sensible thing. Introducing mic'd up, yeah, it would be good if you could, but I said the biggest single problem is the language. The broadcasters, which game was it? I think it might have been the Friday night game, I think, the Falkirk game. There was what can only be described as industrial language, which you could have heard in Kirkcaldy without a microphone. And the usual, well, if you were offended by the language, we're very, very sorry. And they've got to say, and I get it, because you've got kids, and depending how old the kids are, you don't want them swearing just yet. So
well, mine watches Hearts in Scotland. That's going to happen eventually.
Well, yeah, this is very true, and there comes a point at which you just give up, and but I can think of, good friend of mine who's got 3 sons, and I've watched them. I've watched the first game he went to. He was 6 months old, right? And he's strapped in one of these things on his dad's chest, going to see a game against the Albion Rovers in the Cup. And the Daily Record took a picture of him, and it appeared on the front page of their sports supplement under the headline St. John's son. Anyway, Sean is now about 28 or something. And I've seen him and his brothers going all the way through the game, and going to the stage of their dad saying, "Don't say that," to now the whole family, apart from Jackie, his wife. It's all the usual language you'd expect. So it's an issue. It's an issue. And it would be great. Can I see it happening? I don't think so. But it might. But I don't think so.
I might have said the story before, but I'll say it again anyway. I was about 9, 10-year-old. I remember a derby, and my uncle had come down from Elgin to obviously visit the family. And he took me to Tynecastle. And this was like in the 80s. We were sat right next to the dugouts in like the main enclosure. We were sat right next to the dugouts, and the house that they were in was like 5 minutes along the road. My mum was 5 minutes along the road. But my uncle had a real go at Alec Miller, the then Hibs manager. Yep. He was shouting, swearing. My uncle then got arrested at the game.
Oh, right.
Now, I was basically asked, do you want to go back home or do you want to stay here? I was 9 or 10. I said, I'm not leaving. I'm staying. I want to watch the rest of it. It's a derby game. I don't want to leave. My mother went through my uncle so badly for leaving me there. But it's like, I want to stay. It's a derby game. I'm loving this. I had police next to me, like making sure it was all right. But I was like, this is mental. Like, my uncle's getting arrested for shouting and swearing at a manager next to the dugout. It was unbelievable. But I honestly loved it. It was great.
Yeah, and I think it's not just Scottish football. Friends I've got who support clubs in England, they're all across the world. I've maybe mentioned before, you go to Argentina, they are absolutely mad about football in a way which is almost beyond their comprehension, and I think that's it comes back to the VAR thing. That's why I really cannot stand VAR, because it just removes your desire to be at that game and to experience that moment. And again, just looking at some of the comments there, football's a lot more negative. I don't think there's any doubt it is. Yeah.
The one thing I would say, and again, we're all football fans that watch this show and that go to games. I've heard numerous folk, not fans of my club or your club, but I've heard numerous fans of other clubs saying referees are biased towards certain clubs and stuff. I don't believe that for one single second. Referees are human. Now, I think maybe years and years ago, you might correct me if I'm wrong here, but years and years ago, I think referees had to say what club they had an affiliation to. That doesn't happen anymore. But I really don't care if a referee's got a liking for a certain club. They're doing a job that I wouldn't want to do. But I genuinely don't think any referee is biased towards a certain club. I think that's nonsense, and I've always said that.
I think you're right nowadays. Again, for the benefit of anybody who actually isn't aware of this, I did actually do a couple of years research and wrote a book about Scottish referees, and that involved interviewing a lot of the famous names like Willie Young and John Robotham and whatever else. And anecdotally, in the past, and you're going back probably the generation before them, yes, there were some referees who probably did have a bias, but they were in a minority. And their biases were kind of well known. There's the famous photograph. You're aware of the famous Tiny Wharton John Gregg photograph, Graham?
Yes.
Yeah, right. For the benefit of anybody who's not, there's a picture of Tiny Wharton, one of the most famous referees in Scottish football, shaking hands with John Gregg. And for those of you who are not in that particular organisation, you can tell by, and I'm not, you can tell by the arrangement of their fingers that they're clearly exchanging a Masonic handshake. But you're right. Having spoken to loads of referees, and guys who are still involved in refereeing, because all the guys who've given up in doing the top level are now all being assessors. They're going around the country, they're doing junior games, they're doing youth games. And if there was a bad apple like that, they'd get rooted out. So I simply do not believe, first of all, I don't believe that referees shouldn't support a team. They all support a team. Of course they do. And there's grief between Edinburgh and Glasgow. Glasgow tend to get all the cup finals. There's possibly bias in the S of it, but that doesn't alter the fact that when the referee goes out to do the game, he just shuts everything else out from his mind and he referees the game. And again, the guys from behind the whistles were very clear about that. But that backs up everything I discovered from talking to loads of referees. Do they make mistakes? Yeah. Do footballers make mistakes? Probably a lot more. I'm not sure the referee covered all the touches.
This obviously still brings back painful memories, but 1986 when Hearts lost the league to Dundee, we had a penalty denied on our challenge from Sandy Clark. The referee that day was a Hearts fan.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because that gets us onto match fixing and things like that, because obviously there were some people suggested that another game that day was fixed. With my football historian's hat on, I can categorically tell you that matches in Scotland were fixed in the past. I'm not saying that game was, but in the 60s, matches were fixed. And again, going back to my times editing the St Johnstone programme, I used to interview people. You could phone up the press in those days and get to speak to people. Interviewed Craig Brown, the late Craig Brown, right? And this was all in the St Johnstone programme. You can dig it up and look it out. Were matches fixed in those days? Yes, of course they were, he said. If you couldn't get your fixed odd coupon, there was something wrong. So one of the biggest criminals in British football, the fixer in the 60s scandal in England, played for Saints at the end of his career. And Bobby Brown told me that he didn't realise what he'd bought until he bought it. The other players told me the guy, Jimmy Gold, his name was, he was a former international. He was the fixer in the huge scandal in England, which had people sent to jail and stuff. The other players used to like training with him because he was so unfit, they would make them look good. And Bobby Brown told me he basically sacked him, gave him his boots £100 and told him to, depart now, or words to that effect. And he was a crook. There is no evidence that I have that he fixed matches while he was in Scotland, but it was at that time that games certainly were fixed.
At the Schmeiser Stadium between St Mirren and Hibs, at half-time, St Mirren 0, Hibs 0, another 0-0 draw to start the weekend so far. Hopefully a couple of goals in the second half, but 0-0 at half-time so far. And talking about 0-0s, let's go to the games yesterday, and we'll start at the game at Tynecastle. My beloved Hearts drew 0-0 with Rangers. Now, I've seen a lot of dreadful 0-0 draws over the years, but I've got to be honest to say, I thought that was a good game yesterday. I was very impressed with Hearts. I thought first half we played some really good football. I thought Jan Dander looked really good. Gerald Taylor, for me, was absolutely outstanding. What a signing this boy is. And I was happy with that performance from Hearts. Thought it was a decent game.
And you should be happy because it was a decent performance. And you were saying on Friday that the thing that Hearts didn't do last season was come out of the blocks. And they certainly did yesterday. And they were the better team in the first half. Rangers were the better team in the second half. I think a draw was a fair result. It wasn't as exciting as today's game, but it was a good game. There was a lot of good stuff. There were some great saves by both keepers. I think Xander's almost certainly that's him established as the number one. If he came off his line, caught more crosses, he might even get a game for Scotland more often. And you're right, Taylor, great signing. Dander, brilliant signing. Hearts are a stronger team than last year. Leaving aside the fact that you've paid for all this by getting rid of players to St Johnstone, we don't want. I thought Hearts would win yesterday because I think Rangers, it's well known, are in a bit of disarray off the park. It's far too early to say, and I've got no axe to grind for either side of the Old Firm. I would hope I'm completely neutral in that respect. But here's a question for you, Graham. Can either of those two teams play better than that, and will they play better consistently this season?
I would expect Celtic probably to. And you've got to imagine that Rangers probably will at some point. But looking at the Rangers squad yesterday, and I kind of said this to one of my mates yesterday as well, I've seen Hearts play Rangers so many times over the years, and they've given us an absolute hammering. I actually felt quite comfortable watching that game yesterday. I never really thought they had that much of a threat. Connor Barron was all right in the middle of the park. I thought he was decent. Diamandi as well. Dessler had a couple of chances, but I never really felt we were under that much pressure. It's not like we were outplayed at any point in the game. I think you're right. I think Rangers probably did more of the play in the second half, but that's the most comfortable I've felt against Rangers. And I actually said on Twitter as well yesterday, that opening 25 minutes, we created more chances in that game than we have in 90 minutes against Rangers over the past few seasons. We have got a very, very good squad. And I think we need to be, because we're going to be playing Thursday, Sunday in Europe. I think we've got a very, very good squad. We've got a squad of about 28, which will go up to 29 when we get the guy Salazar at left back from Colombia. We've got a very, very good squad. And I genuinely believe that we've got the third best squad out with the Old Firm. And I would still like to think we can challenge for second place. But the Thursday, Sunday games are the problem for me. That's the issue I've got.
Yeah. That has downsides and positives, because obviously you get a lot of money for it, which allows you to then go and buy these players. So that makes a difference. That again widens the gap even further. It would be interesting. I don't know if anybody's ever done this, to actually look at the last 20 years Scottish Premier Championships and actually look at the final positions and then actually compare them to the budgets of each team. Because you'll get some teams who punch way above their weight financially. I mean, Livingston did for a long time. Saints certainly did. Aberdeen have punched below their weight on many occasions. So have Hearts. Hibs definitely have. But I do think that playing in Europe, you've got the advantage of the money. It does give players a different degree of experience. It also allows you to go back to Boy Taylor. I'm not trying to sell him already, now he's gone, but if he carries on being good and he plays well in Europe, people will see him, and you will probably get a decent amount of money for him at some stage. If that's how his game adapts and changes over the rest of the season. So that is that a good thing for Hearts? Yes and no, because there's the money, but you're losing the player. But that means you've got money to go and reinvest in somebody else. I think very early in the season to say this, but I will be surprised if Hearts aren't a third. Could you catch Rangers? Only if Rangers have some kind of self-destruct button.
Someone you mentioned there, I'm glad you mentioned them, Zander Clark. Now, I have backed Zander Clark a lot. I think he's a fantastic goalkeeper. I've had a conversation with numerous fellow Hearts fans and fans of other clubs. I think Zander Clark, for me now, is number one. Stephen Naismith said last week that he's not guaranteeing who's going to be number one every week, which I think is wrong. I think a goalkeeper needs to be playing every week. Mm-hmm. I kind of understand why he did it last season when he alternated, when Gordon came back and gave him the cup games. But I think Zander Clark is very underappreciated by fellow Hearts fans. And I think yesterday, he was in my lineup yesterday. He was the guy that I said would start. And I thought he more than justified that. He made a couple of really good saves. You've obviously seen Zander Clark more than I have when he played at St Johnstone. I think Zander Clark is a fantastic goalkeeper. And I think we're very lucky to have two excellent keepers. But right now, taking off my kind of love for Craig Gordon, Zander Clark's number one for me. He's not done enough for me to get dropped. I think Zander Clark is a brilliant goalkeeper.
I think he is as well. I mean, he's also getting to the age at which he will become even better, because all the experience kicks in. The one big complaint St Johnstone fans always had about Zander was he didn't come off his line. Now, he's a big man. And that, again, makes some of his saves yesterday even more spectacular, because for a big man, he's got to get down very, very quickly, if the ball's on the ground. The touching the ones around the corner, those are good saves, still irrespective of the size. But if you watch Mitov, for example, last season, Mitov commanded his area, and he's not as big as Zander Clark. If Zander Clark could come and do that, then he would be, I would think he should be playing for Scotland ahead of Gunn. That's the one flaw I would say in it. On top of that, I can tell you, having spoken to him, he's a really lovely guy. He's a lovely guy. Big, relaxed. Just again, a wee story. After we'd won, I think it was the League Cup, Watty, who does Saints TV, had a WhatsApp. It was obviously during the pandemic. Had a sort of WhatsApp group with his mates. They're all sitting around with cans of beer celebrating. And he phones up Zander. Zander comes onto the WhatsApp group with all these fans with his medal around his neck and a can of beer, and just had a chat with them for about half an hour. He's that kind of guy, And as fans, you're warm to that. And he's a very good goalkeeper. the defence you have in front of him, it makes a difference as well. I think he didn't have as good a defence in St Johnstone as his predecessors did. So from that point of view, you didn't have Ando and Dave Mackay and Fraser Wright, who were really, really good. And at Hearts, you've obviously got a high, you've got quality defenders in front of them. So that makes a difference. If I was a Hearts fan, I would certainly be suggesting to the manager that he lets Craig Gordon go to St Johnstone on loan. And I would have Zander as number one.
I just think for me, you've got to take sentiment out of it. As much as I'm a massive, massive Craig Gordon fan, he's an absolute hero of mine. He's a legend, probably the best keeper I've seen at Hearts. You've got to also say the fact he's 41. He's not getting any old. He's not getting any younger. He did play a couple of cup games last season, and I still think at times it looked a bit shaky, but it's understandable after a double leg break. But Zander Clark last season had 42 games, and by I think it was around March 29th, he'd kept 14 clean sheets. He's an excellent goalkeeper, but this is a conversation that I have so many times with Hearts fans. Yesterday before the game, a lot of folk had Craig Gordon in the lineup. I didn't. Zander Clark was number one for me, and I think he more than justified that yesterday. He's an excellent, excellent goalkeeper. There was probably a couple of games last season that maybe could have done better with a few efforts, but generally overall, I genuinely think Zander Clark is very underappreciated by some Hearts fans, and I have no issue if Stephen Naismith came out tomorrow and said, right, my number one Zander Clark, I'd have no problem with that.
Yeah, and I think another friend of mine who's a Hearts fan, when Hearts signed him, he got in touch on, I can't remember what it was WhatsApp or something, and he was asking, what do you think? And I said, well, I think he's a very good goalkeeper. He'll make the occasional mistake. And Dougie came back and went, yeah, but tell me a goalkeeper who doesn't. Because they all do. They all make mistakes. The great ones make fewer than the rest, and they pull off the better saves, and they command their area. But again, just if you think about the Championship playoffs last season, there was some great goalkeeping in that. And I think most goalkeepers can pull off great saves. It's the ability to do it consistently and actually to know what your defence is doing. Because Alan Manis, who was his predecessor, Alan had 70 shutouts for St Johnstone. Okay, that was a great St Johnstone team, but I come back to the point about the defence in front of him. Zander made more mistakes, particularly as he was younger, but I come back to the point I made. What is he now, early 30s?
I think he's 32, I think he is.
He's going to get better in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So you've got a goalkeeper who should be the mainstay of your team and first on the team line for next 3 seasons.
Easily. I mean, just looking at the game yesterday, I mean, you are right. I said on Friday that Hearts had to start the game well, and I thought we did. And it again goes back to something else I said yesterday on Twitter. It just shows that pre-season results mean nothing. I have so many Hearts fans saying after that game against Fleetwood last week, oh, this could be a long season. I read nothing at the pre-season games. I thought we were brilliant yesterday. First half, I thought we had the better of it. James Penrith unlucky not to score. Decent save by Butland. I thought the formation was really good. So the 4-2-3-1. I liked the fact that we had interchange between Barry Mackay and Jan Dander, who again I thought was really good yesterday. Defensively, I thought we were pretty solid. I've been disappointed recently with Kai Rolls, but I thought he was really good yesterday. Frankie Kent was excellent. And I thought Kenny Vargas up top caused a lot of problems with his pacing behind. I just thought it was a very good performance from Hearts, and with a bit more luck, a bit more finesse and finishing, we could have won that game.
Yeah, and you could have. Rangers could have won it as well. I think if Rangers had, here's a thought for you, I'm not trying to sell them. If Shankland had some of Desser's chances, do you think he'd have scored them?
Yeah, somebody mentioned that to me as well. I think he probably would have.
I think he would have as well. So, and Rangers must be looking at that. Sorry, I don't want to do a Keith Jackson on you, but they must be looking at that and going, well, hang on a second. The famous meme that was going around with the firing squad last season, let Dessers take the shot, He still scored a lot of goals, but he's not an Ali McCoist. He's not, he's not one of those he's not going to be a Rangers record goal scorer. I think Hearts' first game of the season, they were all tiring towards the end, I thought. You're absolutely right. pre-season friendlies. I've seen Saints draw 0-0 with Southampton in the pre-season friendly. Southampton had Letitia, they had Alan Shearer, they had the way Flowers in goal. It was a brilliant Southampton team. We drew 0-0. How did we manage that? We played Southampton, now we get gubbed. So you're right. I don't read anything into that. The League Cup games, which obviously we've had, you haven't. You can read, you can read stuff into that. You can read into it that actually Dundee United thrashed the teams, most of the teams, apart from United obviously losing to Falkirk, thrashed the teams that were playing. Hibs obviously tripped up against Kelty. We tripped against Alloa. So you can do that. But these, I think, for the Premier clubs, it's a question of making sure you get through and actually trying to see where the team can go, because there is no doubt in my mind that most St Johnstone fans have a degree of trepidation about the game on Monday, because we're not sure. I mean, talking to one last night, a guy who's been around for ages. In fact, if you remember the Wendy Hugh fans, and he's one of the founders of that, we've got a defence who have never played in the Scottish Premiership before at that level. And we're going in to play Aberdeen, who are, I think, on a bit of an up. So it's going to be interesting. Rangers will be second, barring, as I said, a collapse. And if they do collapse, they'll get a new manager in. That'll cost them a lot of money to get rid of the current one, because he's obviously signed a long contract and they haven't got a lot of money. They've got to do well in Europe as well, and they've got a really hard tie coming up.
They do.
Yeah. So, and Celtic are the same. If they're not doing well, the fans turn on them. I don't know whether you think, and anybody watching thinks this is the case. Do the Old Firm fans, are they more vitriolic because they expect to be doing well when they don't do well? Whereas Hearts, Hibs, everybody else, it's like, yeah, okay, we support the team, but we realise we're going to get beat.
I don't want to upset any Celtic fans, we're probably going to, but I genuinely think that the overreaction at times last season was crazy. Celtic have won so many league titles, so many cups in the last few seasons, but whenever they don't win a game, it's sack the board, get rid of the manager. I just think it's crazy the amount of times I hear that. Last season, we beat Celtic at Celtic Park for the first time in God knows how long. And all you saw was Celtic fans shouting at the board, shouting at Rodgers. Even now, the season not even started yet, they kick off at 4:30 today against Kilmarnock. They're talking about the lack of signings. But yeah, I still think they win the league by about 10, 12 points, maybe even more.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, all fans are like that. I mean, the off-the-ball comment from, Tam Cowan, football fans are fickle, is exactly the case. We are fickle. I remember a game when Paul Sturrock was in charge at Saints. Now, Paul was probably Jeff Brown's favourite manager, I think. And we played Stenhousemuir, and we drew with them at Perth, and then we got gubbed 4-0 in the replay at Stenhousemuir. And I was there. And there were, I don't know if the last time you were at Stenhousemuir, Graham, but for the benefit of anybody who's not been there, it's not exactly a huge ground. And there's a wee stand, and the manager and the chairman had no hiding place. There were fans queuing up, hurling abuse at Jeff Brown, wanting Sturrock out the door. And I can guarantee you that those same fans on Monday night will be standing and applauding Jeff Brown as one of the two greatest people in St Johnstone's history. And that's what fans are like.
We have an opening goal at the Smiza Stadium. It's St Mirren 1, Hibernian 0. Roland Edowu has opened the scoring for St Mirren after 49 minutes. So a decent start here for St Mirren so far. I mean, I kind of said this on Friday as well, and I'm not doing this to be biased because I'm a Hearts supporter, but is this David Gray appointment a risk? Because he is a club legend at Hibs, won the cup, scored the winning goal against Rangers. Is it going to be a risk appointing a guy like David Gray, who's got no real managerial experience?
Well, we'll find out. I'm first of all, I'm really impressed by the impassionate and unbiased way you reported the fact that Hibs were losing. And I'm not surprised. I think St Mirren are a good team. They've gone about it all in the right way. They've got a good manager in place, and they are, dare I say it, at the risk of sounding very pompous about my own club, they're going to be the St Johnstone of the next couple of seasons. They're going to be punching way above their weight. They're going to get into Europe. If they win a trophy, even better. And fair play to them, because they are doing everything right. David Gray, Well, again, going back to Jeff Brown, Jeff appointed John Connolly as the manager. Connolly was the Queen of the South manager for a bit and had a lot of success there. John Connolly, for the benefit of anybody who's no idea who I'm talking about, was ranked, admittedly by me and Brian as the authors of the club historians, as the greatest St Johnstone player of all time. And Jeff said and John, I know John well. He lives not too far from me, and he's a lovely guy and a fabulous footballer in his day. Jeff fired him within about a season, and he said he realised that he wasn't the right guy for the job. So it's very easy to let your heart rule your head. And now, have Hibs done that? If they lose today on the back of the Kelty Hearts thing, I don't know who they're playing next, but it'll be a bit like us. If we lose our first 3 games, the pressure will ramp up to get rid of Levine. If Hibs lose their first 3 games, the pressure will ramp up. And it goes back to the earlier conversation, Graham. Clubs get rid of managers far too quickly nowadays. I made the point about Sturrock at Stenhousemuir. Now, today, with a different chairman from Jeff Brown, Sturrock probably gone. But Sturrock became one of our most successful managers and turned the team round and laid the foundation for a lot of stuff, which unfortunately Sandy Clark made a bit of a mess of a bit later on. So it doesn't mean he should get fired just because they have a bad start. But unfortunately, in today's environment, that's maybe what happens. It's always a risk appointing a club legend. You think back to, well, John Gregg wasn't great as a Rangers manager from my recollection.
Mm-hmm.
Billy McNeil wasn't bad. But generally, it's a fairly safe rule that great footballers, and with great respect, I wouldn't include David Gray as a great footballer, but great footballers don't make good managers.
Talking of club legends, what's it like for a St Johnstone fan watching Sean Rooney pulling on the St Mirren top?
Well, and scoring this header. We got Sean Rooney off Inverness, and again, it's the difference between there's Tommy spotting a player, able to persuade him to come. We must have had the money to do it at the time. He is an absolute eccentric genius. He's not the best player in the world, but he is. We're talking earlier about what makes fans want to come and watch a game. If you watched the playoff against Inverness when Rooney scored the goal right at the end, mirroring the goal which Callum Henry had scored, and then he knew he was going to get booked because he'd taken his shirt off, and just the way he approached the referee. I mean, it was the referee was in the spirit of things. There was a couple of minutes to go. We were 4-0 up. He is. It's interesting if you talk to him. He's actually quite quiet. He's not quite what you expect, because I thought he'd be, big character and stuff, but he's not. He is a brilliant player because nobody knows what he's going to do next. He's not the best defensively. You really wouldn't want him centre back for the whole season, but out wide, he's just brilliant. He's value for money. He's entertaining. He'll score you goals. The goal he scored, the header, that summed him up. If you remember the goal he scored against Hibs in the final, he basically.
Oh yes, I do. I celebrated that goal very wildly.
Probably not as much as I did, but that's what Sean Rooney does. He has got the power and the desire to make it his ball and get there first. He's the kind of player every club should have somebody like that. He'll also get sent off occasionally for doing mad things. Actually, I don't know if he did get sent off for Saints, but no. Very long-winded answer, Graham. I think he'll do really well there. And again, it's going back to my previous thesis. St Mirren are the St Johnstone of this current period. There they are. They've bought a good player who will add to their team. There's a player who'd gone down to England, didn't really set the header on fire there, as many Scottish players don't, unfortunately, nowadays, but he's perfect for that club and this league.
He's a really brave player as well, because he puts his head on where others might not go. He's a really, really brave player.
Yeah, no, he is, and he's not without skill, and he's got a bit of a shot on him, and at times he can be a headless chicken. At times, but that's endearing. Fans like that. I mean, there's other fans. I won't mention the name, but there's a midfield player at St Johnstone's now. Most fans don't particularly like. He doesn't have the personality to get away with it. Rooney could make a complete Horlicks of it, and it was like, well, it's just Rooney, It helped that he's related to a St Johnstone great from way back in the day. That didn't do him any harm. But as I said, when I actually spoke to him, I found he wasn't quite as, now it may just be because he was talking to somebody about, his time at the club and history and all that kind of thing, but he wasn't quite as gregarious, and I was expecting a bit more fireworks. Didn't get it. Now he may be totally different with his mates. For example, he's big mates with Jason Kerr. Now there's a player who I'll be interested to see if he comes back to Scotland.
Just going back to yesterday, obviously the game at Tynecastle. I mean, Rangers, I didn't think they were brilliant. I mean, I think they probably will improve. But like I said I think generally, Cyril Dessers, I think he got over 20 goals last season, but he should have a double that. And I kind of agree with your point as well. I think had that been a Lawrence Shankland, which I hope it isn't, then he would definitely score at least a couple of goals yesterday with the chances that he had. But Dessers does a lot of unselfish work. He does a lot of running off the ball. He does cause problems, but it's just some of the easy finishes that he doesn't take. I mean, if that's a better striker, I mean, honestly, if that's a Shankly, he's got a couple of goals yesterday.
Yeah, Rangers are, as I said before, Rangers are going to be probably second because they've got more money than everybody else. Going back to my point about ranking, more money than everyone apart from Celtic. They've got more money than Hearts, obviously. They've obviously got issues with the ground. It'll be interesting to see what impact that has. I know we talked about that briefly on Friday, but will it have an impact? We referred back to Celtic's time at Hampden, and they didn't finish that. They didn't end up particularly high in the table that season. So could that have an impact on Rangers? Hampden is, I don't know what you think, but Hampden it's a ground for its era. Whereas if you go to the best grounds for atmosphere, Tynecastle, at the risk of sounding like I'm blowing smoke, is probably as good an atmosphere as you'll get in Scotland because of the way it's built and because it's so close to the pitch. Ibrox is a bit like that. But Tynecastle has that, encapsulates what Scottish football atmosphere can be. Hampden, on the other hand, is a classic. If you remember the old Rugby Park, it was one of those kind of grounds. There's a brilliant book. It's probably one of the shelves behind me called The Football Grounds of Great Britain. There's a couple of versions of it. And it looks at the history and development. And it looks at every ground in the senior game. And it's really interesting just to see how they were designed. Obviously, a lot of them were designed by the Scottish engineer Archibald Leach. So that's interesting. You've got all that kind of stuff with that. But Hampden is not a ground for great atmosphere unless you go back, in my view, to the days of 80, 90, 100,000 crowds watching Scotland games and Celtic Rangers Cup finals, because if it's half empty, it's not great.
What surprised me yesterday, in a good way for me, is I looked at the two teams yesterday, looked at the two benches. Hearts' bench was actually stronger than Rangers. There was nothing on that Rangers bench that particularly worried me. We had far better options on our bench than Rangers did, which was a big surprise to me.
Yeah, and I think that's indicative of where they are now. It might well be, there's obviously some time to go in the transfer window. And I'm trusting that Keith Jackson isn't right and that you don't lose Shankland, because that if you think about it, if you're a Rangers fan, if they sign Shankland, just take your hat off for a second, the Hearts hat off, and don't throw things at the screen just yet. But if you're a Rangers fan and you sign Shankland, you are going to be cock-a-hoop.
Yeah, I mean, even yesterday, I don't know where he's heard this from, but Chris Sutton yesterday on Sky said that he has apparently heard that Shankland wants to move to Rangers. I don't know where he's heard it from, unless it's Keith Jackson again, but I've heard nothing of the sort. I've not heard anything that says Shankland wants that move.
Well, Chris Sutton, I think Chris Sutton's watching this. Almost certainly not. He's almost certainly at Celtic Park. I don't know. Actually, he wasn't on the Sky panel. I don't know Chris Sutton, but footballers I know who do know Chris Sutton, who've played with him, do not have a lot of nice things to say about the man.
I'm not surprised.
And that's putting it politely. So does he stir it? Yes, he does. I don't think there's any doubt. And the media stir it. The Scottish media, we're going off on a wee tangent here, but I mean, I don't know what you think, but I find Radio Scotland almost unlistenable now. The Saturday afternoon radio programme.
I was kind of agreed. There's maybe 2 or 3 pundits I quite like, but most of them, it's the same old people on it. And they're just very negative, and I don't think they really provide a lot of content. listen, I'm not saying that I'm a particularly great pundit, but I at least like to think that I'm honest. But at times, I think at times on Radio Scotland, they're going to kind of cut back what they're going to say. There's not enough honesty on there, and that's the issue that I've got. It feels like they're not being honest enough, and I think as a pundit, you've got to be honest.
There is absolutely no doubt that they're not honest, because and I know with my SFSA hat on, is that there are certain stories they will not pursue. There are certain clubs they've got to be more careful with than others because they don't want to fall out with them. We've seen what happens when people get banned from grounds. My biggest gripe is more with the ones who, and I used to like Richard Gordon, who obviously tends to do Sunday, and he's much more measured and much more calm. Whereas now there's one or two of them who, if they find a drama, their next move is to make a crisis out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is always at peak level, and they're looking for the story rather than an honest comment about the game. And I find that, as I said, I cannot listen to it now. I'd rather listen to TalkSport. Okay, it covers the English stuff, but it's more objective. Whereas these guys, they all know stuff that they cannot say. They all know stuff that they cannot say about various clubs because they're privy to an awful lot of stuff. They've got really good networks, and I accept that. But it's more to do with actually, it's almost, I mean, an example of it today. And if there's any Celtic Rangers fans watching, they'll probably be throwing things again. The Sky game is being broadcast from Celtic Park. The pundits are there; they're not at Dens, And it's the same. You have to have Celtic and Rangers pundits, people who support those clubs. That's why the conversation about Premier Sports is important, I think, on Friday. Getting more variety, getting this, you don't just get to see your team when you're playing Celtic and Rangers. You get to see them when they're playing Hearts or Hibs or Aberdeen or whoever else. And you're getting people who are not really, you're getting people who actually are interested in the game. Whereas there are one or two of them who quite clearly really don't give a monkeys. If they're not watching the Old Firm, they're not bothered.
Well, even yesterday, looking at the opening game of the season, Hearts against Rangers at Tynecastle, a big game to start the season. And their pundits, as always, are Sutton, Boyd and McFadden.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the point? All you're going to get, as usual, is the same going back and forward between Boyd and Sutton, who bring nothing at all to the table. It's just constant arguing. And it's boring to watch. Like, if I wasn't a Hearts fan, I'd still find it very boring if I'm an outsider watching that going, why are they even on it? They're offering nothing in terms of anything about the game. It's just constant back and forth about Celtic and Rangers. Oh, we've got this, you've not got that. That's a penalty, that's not a penalty. It's boring to watch.
Yep, I would rather, talking about Hearts fans, I would have biscuits every day of the week because you might not agree with him, he says, but and I know him, he absolutely says what he thinks, and he's got an inside track into the game. And he, as you know, he's a Hearts fan, but if Hearts aren't doing it, he'll say.
Yeah.
He doesn't look for excuses, whereas with complete lack of respect, the two men you mentioned there, their first thing is to look for an excuse. And for a lot of other fans, I think there was a game when Rangers were getting absolutely tonked by Celtic. I thought Chris Boyd was going to be in tears at halftime. I was like, sorry, just... If you go back to off the ball, the two guys there who support Motherwell and St Johnstone and are diehard fans, and have been since the year dot, they are prepared to be honest about their teams and how they've played, and if they've played badly and they get thrashed, they put their hand up, And that's how I think this show here with the guys that are on it is like that as well. You've got people who support all sorts of clubs, and one of the reasons I've got quite enjoying being on it is because you just don't have that aggressive partiality, if I can put it like that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have, if we beat Hearts, which probably is unlikely, I suspect, you'll not be all that happy. You'll be honest about it.
Mm-hmm.
You'll say the referee cheated or something.
Depends who it is.
It depends who it is, on a different subject, I noticed that Kane said Danny Armstrong's on the bench for Kilmarnock. I don't know if he's injured or not, but there's a player who I'd pay money to watch. There's a player who I can see.
A cracking player.
I'm slightly surprised he's still there.
Yeah, I mean, there's still, 4 weeks left of the window. That might change eventually, but maybe they're looking at European game on Thursday thinking, well, we might not beat Celtic. Keep him for the European game, which I suppose makes sense. But I just think even like my wife is not a football fan at all. She'll maybe watch it occasionally, but not a lot. But she's actually been to see somebody that's on Radio Scotland a few times, Ray Bradshaw, who's a part of Thistle fan. And she really likes him. She thinks he's a really good guy. He's really funny. And actually, I quite like listen to. It's obviously been a thing for years and years on the ball and off the ball, and I do find it entertaining. They are Cosgrove and Cowan are very, very honest. Tam Cowan's actually done quite a few things at Tynecastle in terms of the Foundation of Hearts. He's a very, very good guy. Very, very honest. Very, very open. Very, very funny as well. But I like listen to it because they are honest. They've got no agendas. They just speak honestly, and that's what I think you need to do. You need to be honest. Folk may not agree with some of the stuff you say, but at least if you're honest, folk can say, well, do you know what? He's been honest. But on Radio Scotland, some of these pundits, I just don't think they're being honest enough.
No, I would agree with that. And Tam Cowan does an awful lot of stuff for lots of clubs. I've seen him saying stuff. It must be said that his material is not suitable for pre-9 o'clock. There's one particular joke which I couldn't even begin to think about repeating here, which I still tell people because it's just so funny. But it's not suitable for a mixed audience. Let's put it like that. And he doesn't hold back. But you're right. He is honest, and that's what I think makes that show. Because a lot of people would think it's getting past its sell-by date because it's been on the go for so long. But what would replace it?
I know.
I think it would be something which would be. They'd be chasing the story, they'd be chasing the sensational, whereas the two of them don't. And I think that's what gives it, what grounds it. And then they get entertaining people in, of course, and they have a good laugh about stuff. And yeah, I've heard complaints from people who, and I've been on it, and I find it slightly intimidating, to be honest. But they're very good at making you feel at ease. Tam's always looking for a laugh. I mean, he's the guy who's going to crack the guy. Stuart is not a comedian. Well, not professional in that sense, but Stuart's a very, very bright guy, as you know, and brings a whole different dimension. The two of them work really well together. Graham, can I go off on a wee tangent here, please?
Yeah, on you go.
Okay. This is something which will bore the pants off everybody watching, but it's actually really important. And with my Scottish Football Supporters Association hat on, this Wednesday there is a meeting at Holyrood which will be of no interest to anybody at all watching this or indeed Radio Scotland. But it should be, because it's basically a continuation of the debate in Holyrood from January this year about the future of Scottish football, and the review which the Scottish Football Supporters Association did a few years ago, looking for more transparency and more honesty in the game. And I'm not going, it's the CEO and the chair, and Henry McLeish, who obviously is the former First Minister, who, being a politician, knows how to do these things. We're meeting with the powers that be, Doncaster, Maxwell, and lots of other people from the establishment. And in my view, it's important that these meetings carry on, because we've got a regulator being introduced down south. It gets into the politics now, but all these kind of things actually matter in terms of transparency, knowing what's going on, the kind of stuff we've talked about. So that, I won't say any more than that. It's happening on Wednesday. I'll report back later on as to what happens. What we believe will happen, what we believe the politicians want to happen, is for a series of meetings to carry on and look at some of these issues in relation to transparency. So, for example, again, just now, for anybody who's involved in youth football, there's a new piece of software called Comet the SFA have spent a lot of money on. There's problems with that. Now, hopefully they're just teething problems, but it's causing issues. These are the kind of things which people need to know about. And that's one of the things which hopefully will come out from next Wednesday. So anyway, that's the end of it. It's not commercial. It's just telling people it's boring, it's politics, but it's actually really important for Scottish football, because just now it's not transparent enough. Fans don't know what's going on. We tend to be at this, things like the cup final when Inverness are playing there and they have it at a ridiculous o'clock so people can't get back. All these kind of things fans get shortchanged on. So that's something we're pushing for on Wednesday. We can now go back to maybe the other game yesterday, because let's be honest, it was not all that exciting.
Yeah, I will touch on that in a minute, but just to go on to obviously finish off about yesterday, but I genuinely think if Hearts can perform like that for the rest of the season, and with obviously still players to come back, I don't see, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I don't see any reason why Hearts shouldn't be finishing third quite comfortable with that squad.
No, I think you're right. I think Hearts should finish third. Will they finish third? Almost certainly. Again, if they lost Shankland, that would make it more difficult.
Yeah.
And that's a possibility, obviously. But Vargas, I mean, you talked about Vargas, he's got real pace, and pace scares the pants off defenders. They've got other players who come in who look good, and they've got Danda and they've got Blair Spittle, and there's goals there. So it wouldn't be it wouldn't be a disaster. It would be a big setback. But even without him, I think, even without Shankland, I think Hearts should still finish third. Depending on how Aberdeen go, I would expect them to be the main challengers for that position. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I would say so. I think Jimmy Thielen will do a decent job. Obviously, you'll be hoping that they don't do that tomorrow, but I think they will do a decent job. And a bit like us with Shankland, I think the big thing for them is keeping Majowski. If they keep him, then they've got a decent chance.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that somebody buys him the next 5 minutes. I think that's unlikely. On the other hand, it does look like he's going, and they've obviously got the problem with Duke and, you know, not showing up and not training and all that kind of stuff. So, but I've seen some of the highlights of some of their games, and they look good. Okay, they're playing against lower division teams, but they're putting them away, and they're looking a better team than Aberdeen were last year. Losing Clarkson's a big problem, as indeed is losing Graham, which I've just done. Oh, he's back again. And he disappeared there for a second.
My laddie was trying to phone me.
Oh, okay, right.
He'll message me.
All right. So, yeah, I think Aberdeen are the main team, the most likely challengers to Hearts. I think Hibs are probably going to have an up and down season. But I'm prepared to lie through my teeth in 3 months' time and say, no, I thought they were going to be great if they're actually top. And as I said, St Mirren, I think St Mirren will be in the top 6 and will do really, really well. After that, somebody will come out of the pack. Somebody will, you know, I don't think it'll be Motherwell. I think it'll be us. Dundee United might be a good shout. But you can almost write the table now. And you'll be out by 1 or 2 places for most teams. Yeah.
We have kicked off at Celtic Park just about 2 minutes into the game. Celtic no Kilmarnock nil, but St Mirren Kilmarnock have actually started quite well, starting on the front foot. But the other game yesterday, another thoroughly entertaining game. I'm lying about that. Motherwell nil, Ross County nil. A point probably about the fair result, but I know that Stuart Kettlewell was frustrated because they did have a lot of chances. Ross Laidlaw and the St Johnstone Ross County goal was fantastic yesterday. I mean, again, maybe not a great game yesterday, but I think a point apiece probably the fair result, to be honest.
It was like the Rangers Hearts game. I mean, the result was probably right. Motherwell were the better team. Motherwell should have scored. Would they have scored if Theo Bair was playing? Possibly. It's like Shankland, you know. They've obviously lost 1 or 2 players. They've obviously got Liam Gordon in from us. My understanding is they've paid him more money than we were offering, but that's a reflection of the fact that Saints haven't got shed loads of cash. And Liam Gordon is a very solid Premier Division central defender. He is not Ando or Fraser Wright or one of the guys under Tommy who were a class above that. He's not Jason Kerr, who I think is a class defender. Certainly was when he was fully fit. And I think Ross County and Motherwell played the kind of football and got the kind of result which they'll both be happy with, because it means that they've not lost, which is stating the obvious. But for a first game of a season, for clubs who are expected to be in the lower half of the table, that's a point on the table. And it's, if you lose the first game, which nobody's done yet, then you've got the second game coming up and you're thinking, right, we'll lose this. And all of a sudden, you're starting to think, hang on a second, where are we going to end up on this table? It almost, I think, kicks in that quickly, plus the pressure on managers we talked about before ramps up.
It's a fair point you make about Theo Bair, though, because some of the chances that they had, and this feels strange to say because obviously it's kind of a one-season wonder from Bair last season, but I think if they did have Theo Bair, Mother would probably win that game yesterday.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the difference a good striker makes. I mean, you talked about Miovski at Aberdeen. You talked about Dessers at Rangers. Yes, he scored a lot of goals, but then again, playing for Rangers, I would probably score a few goals, and I think Theo Bair, it will be fascinating to see how he gets on, because he's not Scottish, but Scottish football is littered. I mean, Shankland, case in point, who go elsewhere, go to the continent and just don't quite make it. On the face of it, Bair's got all the attributes. He's huge, man. He's reasonably quick. He's somehow or other become good in there because, quite frankly, couldn't head the ball to save himself at Saints. And he's a goal scorer. So I do think that he will probably be okay where in Belgium, but I don't think he's going to be great. But Motherwell, I think Motherwell will be happy with what they've got. If they've got some of the window to go yet, they may find somebody to replace him. We've got enough strikers to get one of ours probably.
I mean, I know that they've got Zach Rudden. He had a couple of decent opportunities yesterday, but couldn't quite finish them. But to be fair to Ross Laidlaw, I thought he was excellent for County yesterday, and definitely got Ross County the point, to be honest.
Yeah. Zach Rudden or Zach Robinson?
Oh, Robinson, I mean.
I was going to say, Zach Rudden's at, is he at Dunfermline?
I think he is, yeah.
Yeah. He scored one goal for us on loan from Dundee. Or no, he's at Queen's Park. He's at Queen's Park because Callum likes him. Ross County, as a St Johnstone fan, I look at Ross County thinking, they've sold their best striker. Well, they've sold one of their strikers. Jordan White missed a good chance towards the end of the game to win it for them. I know we were linked with him at one time when Tommy was the manager, though he didn't come for whatever reason. Whether we couldn't afford it, I don't know. But he's probably their most dangerous player. Having lost Anda, Ross County always... Roy McGregor throws money at it at Christmas. If they're not doing well, he throws money at it and they by and large survive. So I think it's going to be the same for them this season. I think Motherwell will be much the same as last season. But going back to the earlier conversation, you really want to, you want to see good games between these teams. You don't want to see them so scared of losing. I talked last season, the game we played against Livingston before Christmas. It was one of the worst games of football I have ever seen. It was shockingly bad. Two teams who were petrified of losing and who couldn't string a pass together to save themselves. And it was a time that Derek Adams had his famous rant about Scottish football. And most of the guys standing around me and the Saints fans were like, well, he had a point. It was terrible. So I would rather see, going back to 18-team league, all this other kind of stuff, a situation by which we can actually go and enjoy teams trying to win.
It looks like we're going to have our first winner of the weekend, as at the Smirza Stadium, it's now St Mirren 2, Hibernian 0. Ocean Smith has made it 2 after 80 minutes. So it looks like we're going to get our first win this season. And I've got to say, I mean, looking at the game on Thursday, I know that people have said it's an Icelandic part-time team, but that was St Mirren's first European game in 37 years, first home game. I thought they were excellent. To then play on Sunday and looking like they're going to get 3 points, that's a really good start to the season for St Mirren.
Yeah, as I said earlier on, Graham, I think St Mirren are going to be absolutely fine this year. Sorry to bang on about this. I think Tony Fitzpatrick or somebody actually made the point they'd actually almost model themselves in St Johnstone, a club punching above its weight, bringing in a good manager, bringing in good players, and you look at the way they play, the way they played rather on Thursday night. There was no way they weren't going to win that game. They were miles better. And they probably should have won across there from what I gather. The fact they've beaten Hibs today is not a surprise, to me, at least. I've got friends who are St Mirren fans who'll be delighted. I'll doubtless get a text afterwards telling me what it was about. I just think St Mirren are a good team, and I'll be staggered if they're not in the top 6 at the end of the season.
I would agree. I mean, I thought St Mirren were excellent again last season, did so well. They've got, I think it's SK Brann in the next round, a Norwegian team. They'll probably fancy the Chancellor with 2 legs. I mean, we spoke about it earlier. First game of the season, win, lose, or draw. It's the first game of the season, but how big a blow already is that going to be at Hibs to lose your opening game?
How big a blow is that to Hibs? That's a very good question. Having lost to Kelty and therefore got the hairs running amongst the discontent, plus you've got this spat between the owners, with the minority owner basically saying the majority owner needs to, do something for one of them.
Sorry, Alistair, just quickly, it's now St Mirren 3, Hibs 0. Ocean Smith has just made it 3-0.
Well, at the risk of sounding like a pessimist, that means if we only get beat 1-0, we won't be bottom of the league. So, I'll wait and see what my heavy friend. I've got my mate Alec Klein, who's a proper entrepreneur, if you like that. He's a big heavy, and he's again one of these honest kind of guys. He'd be good to get on this program actually, because he's good for a laugh. He will tell me the truth as he sees it, and as I said earlier, I think Hibs, it's a bad result because if it finishes 3-0, what's the time now? About 5 minutes to go?
Yeah, it's about 5 minutes to go, yeah.
Yeah. Assuming it finishes like that, then in the atmosphere that we have in the environment of Scottish football today, with fans getting on the owners' backs, there's obviously disquiet amongst the owners. It's a bit like Rangers. The fans aren't stupid. You can see when there's disquiet and discord at your club. St Johnstone fans know there were issues over the last couple of seasons. Maybe don't know all the stuff, but they know there were issues. Rangers fans know there's issues. Hibs fans know there's issues, and that impacts on the team. That's why we went from two cups to being nearly relegated.
I go back to last season, and kind of maybe halfway through the season, I wasn't convinced that Naismith was the right man. I was wanting him to go because the results were not great, and then we went on a really good run, ended up finishing third quite comfortably, and I'm glad that we didn't react. But there does seem to be a lot of tension behind the board at Hibs. Some people behind the scenes didn't want David Gray as manager. Now, that can't be a good thing. If you've got disillusion within the boardroom, the fact that some folk didn't want David Gray, some folk did, and you've now looking like you're going to lose your first game, and it's not even like a narrow defeat. They're getting beat 3-0. That's not a good start. No,
and again, going back to the earlier conversation, you should not therefore sack your manager or get too upset, because I obviously, you argue from a Hearts perspective, I argue from my knowledge of St Johnstone. When Tommy Wright was our manager, now Tommy is, without a shadow of doubt, the greatest manager in St Johnstone's history, and I can say that with my club historian hat on, despite the fact Callum won more cups. We would go through phases occasionally of losing 5 games in a row, but Tommy had the ability to actually keep the players grounded and go, look, hang on a second, we'll get out of this. And then we'd go on a winning run of 3 games in a row. All of a sudden, you're up the table. And the COVID season, the case in point, we played Kilmarnock, drew 0-0 just before Christmas. We put that in our greatest ever, we did a book on greatest games for St Johnstone. We put a 0-0 draw with 89 Saints fans watching it. I know, because I was one of them. And that turned our season round. And we ended up getting into ended up in the top 6 because of the way things worked out, because we went on this fabulous run. Hibs have got to try and find some way of doing that, because otherwise they're a big enough club like Hearts are, or Rangers or Celtic, that the fans make noise, and because they're one of the big clubs in Scotland, they get more presence in the media. The guys on Sportsound we were talking about before go, oh, here's a nice drama, we'll just create a crisis, and then they go and ask really provocative questions like, do you think that David Gray's the right person for the job? And they absolutely stir it, so they make it even worse. And that's again one of the problems I've got with Sportsound nowadays, is that they actually are actively, they'll deny this through their teeth, but they're actively doing things which will potentially cause somebody to lose their job. Now, that's slightly different from saying they're actively wanting them to lose their job, but they're actually doing things that they know perfectly well will make it more difficult for them to retain their job. And I don't think that's right, because you don't hear, wouldn't it be great if you had all the managers on the radio, they're going, you know what, that Chris Boyd, he's pants, how does he get away with it? I mean, get him to, you know. And all of a sudden this guy goes, oh, maybe he's got a point. Sorry, Chris, bye. You know, we'll get somebody else in, because that's basically what the press do at the managers. And I know they've got to make a living. The newspaper industry is totally knackered. So broadcast is important. The media that you use, TikTok, Twitter, etc., is hugely important. Bearing in mind that a lot of people still don't use it, well, an awful lot do. So the media are in a rock and a hard place here, but they should still be honest. And trying to answer your question about David Gray and Hibs just in one final sentence, absolutely stick with the guy just now and see, because maybe he's got something, but I'll understand why he's under pressure, and it's not a good result for Hibs, especially if it's finished now.
Do you know what I don't like as well? And this always winds me up. When a manager's doing really badly, and this isn't just sports, and this is everybody, when a manager's doing badly and they interview players and say, oh, do you know, what's your thoughts on your manager? What do they expect him to say? Do they expect him to say, he's terrible, get rid of him? They're obviously going to back him. It happens all the time. And whenever I hear it, it winds me up, because I think, what do you expect the players to say? They're not going to chuck his manager under the bus and say, nah, he's terrible, needs to get sacked. It really frustrates them when they do that, because what are they going to say?
Yeah, well, if in the unlikely event they say, no, actually he's rubbish, they're not going to be playing for the team the next week, you know, so they're just not going to do it. And it's the necessity for creating drama. It's the necessity to chase the story and make a story where maybe there isn't one. And I know it's their job. I get it's their job. They're no longer reporters. In the old days, and again, this is my boring historian's hand, you look at all the papers, say, even up to the 60s, they reported the game because there was no other way of actually knowing what went on. So they'd tell you what went on at every stage in the game. And obviously there was huge, big reports, and it was brilliant. You got so much information. Nowadays, all they do is they actually interview a few people after the game and, you know, write a few quotes and then say what the score was. There's not actually any real description of what happened in the game.
We've got 50 minutes on the clock at Celtic Park. Still Celtic 0, come on at 0. Celtic went very close through Keogh a minute ago, but just safe from the keeper. But just looking back at the game yesterday, I mean, I spoke to Stephen about this on Friday. I found it very strange, the reaction from Motherwell fans after the game against Partick last week. Now, I know that it wasn't a great game, that we get football stopped, as Stephen said, but Motherwell did still get through. But the booing at the end of the game when they got through, I just found it very harsh. And Stephen kind of said that results have not been great, performances have not been great. But look at last season. They went on a horrendous run, 15 games without a win. And then actually did quite well. I just find it really strange, the reaction.
You're absolutely right. And they had that horrendous run. And it could have been worse. I mean, I was talking about the Kilmarnock game when we drew 0-0 with them. We were beating them at Fir Park, and they got an equaliser in the 97th minute or something, which I wouldn't say it turned their season round, but it certainly made a difference. And it's just everything we've been talking about. People are far too quick to say, that's wrong, I want this changed. Apart from anything else, the clubs haven't got the money to keep firing managers, because these guys, depending on the contracts they're on, they're going to have to pay them off. I think what it would cost to pay off our manager at St Johnstone, it's a lot of money. And it's money we haven't got. It's money we could use to pay a salary of a player. So it's not quite as simple as just going, yeah, he's rubbish. And I say that having seen Saints lose to Alloa. If we'd actually lost the next game at East Fife, then I think you'd have found the clamour for Craig Levein to go would be immense. But I could justify that by saying he actually has the second worst record of any St Johnstone manager in history. Therefore, you've got a case in point. David Gray hasn't had a chance to establish that. Stuart Kettle turned the club round and basically, arguably saved them when they could easily have become a Livingston and gone down. So it's just ridiculous. And dare I say it, social media is a large part of the problem.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The champions are off and running. They have taken lead against Kilmarnock after 16 minutes through a really good finish from Rio Hatate. So Celtic 1-0 up after 17 minutes. I think looking at Ross County, I said on Friday that I still think they're going to struggle this season. They've got rid of their two best players in Simon Murray and Jan Dander. Thank you, Ross County, because I love Jan Dander already. But I think they'll struggle again. I mean, yesterday, fair enough, they got a point away from home. Not a bad result. But I still think they're going to struggle this season.
I don't think that. Well, Ross County and Saints are almost certainly most people's choice for second bottom or bottom, depending on who you choose. I do think though that in the past, their chairman has put his hand in his pocket and at Christmas he's found players and bailed them out, and that's happened quite a lot. And they got to the playoffs comfortably last season. I don't know how Saints would have done if they'd been in the playoffs. I'm not sure because we were not in good form. But the gulf between at the end of a very long season, there is that gulf, and that's why most of the time the Premier League team wins. Motherwell against Rangers, case in point. Ross County, I think, will struggle this season because they haven't got the players. I don't know enough about anybody they've brought in. I don't actually know anything about anybody they've brought in. The keeper's not bad, but they're just, they're a team which is going to be at the bottom half of the table, and you could say that from the word go. I know a lot of people like going up there. It's a trip, it's a day out, etc., etc. I would actually just change the subject slightly, but in relation to that, look at Inverness just now.
Oh yeah,
there's a club that is in serious trouble, and it's a club that won the Scottish Cup not that long ago. And having lived up there, I used to live in the Black Isle for a few years. It's a part of the world where, obviously, when I was living there was just Highland League clubs, but there should be, in a country like Scotland, the Highlands should have a team. It's no divine right to have a team, but it's good that it does have a team in the top flight. And whether that would mean Inverness and Dingwall, should you just have one team for there? Well, history says no, but in actual fact, there were 3 teams in Inverness and now there's only 2. So those things could happen. Would that create a stronger, because yes, of course there's history there. Now, if somebody suggested to me that, Saints combined with Dundee or something, I would tell them where to go. So, but you look at it and you go, well, actually, maybe that's, because in historical terms, they've been in the top flight for a very short period of time since the start of Scottish football. I don't know, what do you think? I mean, is that something which we should look at as Scottish football? Should we look at combining? You couldn't do Hearts and Hibs or Dundee United, but some of the teams in other parts of the country. Is that possible, or is that just a bridge too far?
It's possible. I mean, Wallace Mercer tried to do the whole Hearts Hibs thing, and that didn't work. And I'm glad that didn't happen, because that was just never going to happen. And I know years and years ago as well, I think Peter Marr, tried to merge Dundee United, but again, that didn't happen. And I think that was an issue with Rob Douglas. I think it was. There was something about him and his daughter or something. But I don't see it happening. I mean, Inverness are a really good club, but they are in an absolute mess. Yeah. I mean, they're in League One. Could they go down to League Two? Potentially. They're just an absolute disaster just now.
And the guy who's in to buy them, be careful what we're saying in case Melinda and friends are watching. There are some questions, I think it's fair to say. That's really as far as strongly as I'd put it. But there's some questions about, and it's important that Scottish clubs are actually run by people who care about them. I'm not saying this guy wouldn't necessarily, but we've got an American owner now. There's quite a few American owners. If you look again at the history of Scottish clubs, a lot of clubs have gone bust. A lot of clubs. I mean, not just the famous ones like Thurlanich, but in your neck of the woods, Leith Athletic, there's lots and lots of clubs that have gone to the wall who've actually played in the Scottish League.
Well, look at, all you've got to do is look at Gretna. Once Brooks Melson passed away, sadly, they then had no money because it was Brooks Melson that basically bankrolled it.
Yeah. And it's not impossible nobody has a divine right to exist. Otherwise, Vale of Leven would still be playing in the top division. Dumbarton would still be a big club. Renton probably still exists, but so nobody does. The big clubs have come through, they've got their support, all that kind of stuff. But again, we talked about on Friday, you'll have been to games at Ibrox and Celtic Park when there weren't big crowds because they were doing badly and the fans were not following them. If Hearts do badly, the fans fall away. It happens with every club. Now, there's so many established clubs, that's not going to happen. But Inverness is a real problem because they could go down again. And Third Lanark's the classic example of corruption and criminality and things going wrong. I talked earlier on about the fact there was match fixing in Scottish football. Now, I'm not saying for a second this applies to Inverness or anything else like that, as I said, in case my London friends are watching, but there is always that concern. There's always that concern. And the fit and proper person guidelines, has anybody got a clue what they are? Have you actually looked up what I have, and I don't understand them. It matters, because it matters if you're a supporter of Dumbarton or Inverness or Hearts, and you've had some interesting owners over the period.
Oh yeah,
it makes a huge difference.
Certainly does. We've got about 5 minutes left. It is still Celtic 1-0 up against Kilmarnock. We've still got 3-0 to St Mirren. That game's not quite finished yet. But we have one more game to talk about, which hasn't happened yet. That is tomorrow night, as St Johnstone and Aberdeen go head-to-head on Monday night in the live Sky game again at McDermott Park. What are you feeling about tomorrow's game?
Well, I'm expecting Chris Boyd to be sitting in Ibrox analysing with Chris Sutton. No, what I'm thinking is that I can tell you that there is a plea. There's about 8,000 tickets sold, so it's going to be virtually full, which is really good. Aberdeen, great support. Aberdeen have got fabulous away support. I've sold all their tickets. Everybody's encouraged to get there. If you're an Aberdeen fan watching this, get there before 7:30, because there is going to be a SFA SPFL presentation to Jeff Brown. The new owner, Adam Webb, is going to say one or two things. Whether Jeff will say anything, I'm not too sure, because Jeff being Jeff will probably just go, thanks very much, didn't really enjoy it very much. and that's it, which is not true, but you know what he's like. He's not that kind of demonstrative person. And I think that's a highlight, just nothing to do with the game itself, but I would hope you would agree, and I hope most people watching this would agree, there's probably not been a better chairman in Scottish football for the last 4 decades.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And as to the game, do you know what? I'd bite your hand off for a boring 0-0 draw. But I told my mate who's the gambler, I had a sneaking suspicion we might win, but I'm not sure. Honestly, what do you reckon? Can you see us getting anything out of it? Because with my head on as opposed to my heart, I'm struggling.
I mean, is it a good time to play Aberdeen? A new manager coming in, a few new players. Maybe it's the best time to get Aberdeen. You've obviously got a few new players as well. Like I said, you've got a Hearts C team there. But I would probably say Aberdeen will probably sneak it. But at home, you've just said there about the attendance. It should be a decent crowd tomorrow. If you start well, you've got a chance. But it's a very difficult game for St Johnstone to start. Yeah,
we have got forwards who can score. Kimpioka's been on fire. Okay, he's playing against Lawrence Davies. He is very, very quick. Sidibe, if he has a season like the second half of last season when he actually came in the team, he'll be away by the end of the year, because he'll score 15, 20 goals. The big problem is that we've got a defence right across the back of the defence, not one of whom has actually played, I think, in the Premier League. McClellan might have played 1 or 2 games last year. None of the rest of them have. So they're not tested at this level at all. The left back we signed is out injured, so we're not sure what we're doing at left back. Kelchin's at right back is actually not too bad with Dre Wright in front of him. That's actually quite good. And if you've got Graham Carey in your team, you've always got a chance, because Carey is capable of doing something that no other footballer at St Johnstone can do. But the defence is the problem, and the goalkeeper, he's letting 2 howlers already. So Craig Gordon would be welcomed with open arms.
Yeah,
I think
Graham Carey on his day is a fantastic player. So creative with that left foot. He's got a wonderful left foot.
Yeah. I mean, if you watch the game against Motherwell at the end of last season, the one when we stayed up, his ball in for Nicky Clark, who's still not. Nicky Clark's not even featured this year, and I'm not sure whether he's injured or what the story is. Obviously, the big boy we got, the ex-Hearts player whose name I can't pronounce,
Piazzu.
Thank you, is injured. Right? So we've got all these strikers, and we've got Mackenzie Kirk, and who again is not proven at all at this level, and he's not going to start the game. So there's an awful lot of imponderables, and we've got a middle of the park where every Saints fan I know wants to see Sprangler playing, who was injured there last season, but he was a really good sitting defensive midfielder, but he's not a Levine favourite.
Well, it has now finished at the Smizer. St Mirren 3, Hibs 0, so a great start for St Mirren. It is still 1-0 to Celtic after 28 minutes. We are out of time. Thank you, as always, for everyone's contributions. Thank you to Alistair for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. We are back next Friday at 5 o'clock till 7. I hope you enjoy your week. If you're watching any football this week, I'm looking forward to tomorrow because Hearts have the draw for Europa League. Looking forward to that. But anyway, thank you, as always, for all your contributions, and I hope you have a cracking rest of the weekend. We shall see you later, folks. Thank you, Alistair.
Okay, thanks, folks. Cheers.
The Locker Room,